Well, welcome everyone. I'm Dennis Sullivan. I'm a member of the board of directors of the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce, San Francisco chapter. Welcome to our program. I should start with a description of the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce and our mission statement, so I get that out of the way. The Swiss American Chamber of Commerce San Francisco chapter is the first and it's the oldest chapter of the Swiss American Chamber in the US. It was founded in 1989. It's a 501, it's a nonprofit corporation. And our goals are to strengthen the ties between Switzerland and the US in business and commercial and cultural matters through networking, local support services, and through business expertise and mentoring for our members. So we have, I don't see everyone on there today. I see Bjorn, and of our board of directors, we have 2 or 3 members today, and I'm not sure who's on it, but I'm supposed to be Bjorn Jecker, a partner of CRC Results, a business consulting firm. Devin Friday, who's a CPA with Spot, Lucy and Wall, a international tax firm that I've worked with for many years. And perhaps Boris Pavlovic, who is with DocuSign. I don't know if he's signed in yet. But anyway, our program today is going to be about how to structure the growth of your business in order to achieve the maximum sale price down the road. I've worked with Rich Gunn, who's our presenter this morning, for several years, and we share a lot of clients. And one of the most distressing things that can happen is a client announces that they're ready to sell their business, and they think everything's going to come together at the last second. And it will. You can structure it. You'll have your accounting, you'll have the lawyers and all of that, but it's too late to really grow the business and maximize perhaps the value. So the program today is really not about who to hire to help you sell your business and when it's ready to sell and how to structure the sale, but how to structure the growth of your business over the last 5, 6, or 7 years in order to maximize the value of that sale. It's a very important factor. So let me introduce our guest speaker, Rich Gunn. He's with BPM, which was Burr Pilger Mayer. It's an accounting firm, it's a regional accounting firm. It was founded in San Francisco in 1986. It's probably the largest regional accounting firm in the Bay Area, at least I think it was. Rich Gunn is a partner in the advisory practice of BPM. He's a CPA with a background in tax. He's a certified exit planning advisor, and he leads the value acceleration exit planning practice at BPM. He joined BPM in 1992, and I met him just a few years thereafter. We were working together on some networking groups, and we started sharing clients, and he's a terrific accountant, terrific mentor for his businesses. Like me, he specializes in owner-managed businesses over the years and helping them grow their business and from soup to nuts to help form them and to help sell them. So some cool facts about Richard, just before we get started. He released an ebook recently, and it's called Value Focused Business Planning, which discusses many of the issues we're going to have in today's program. And I'm sure that if you ask him or you send him a note, he'll be happy to share the link to buy this ebook. So please keep that in mind. In his spare time, some cool facts. Rich is a passionate bicycle rider and commuter. He's a big time lover of live music, live events, and he is also a crime fiction junkie reader like me. So you got a passionate, fun-loving junkie. When's the last time you heard those words describing an accountant? They really do describe Rich. We're recording this program, so if you wish to later visit it, you can go our website on the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce, San Francisco chapter, or YouTube and pick it up there. And with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Rich. Rich, you ready?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you went away for us a little bit. All right, Rich, I introduced you. We're all ready to go. Get started, please.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dennis, for moderating and inviting and the kind introduction. And thank you to Jeffrey to making this all possible today. And thank you to the Swiss American Chamber for hosting today's event. Let me share my screen here. Is that screen visible to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started. So we're talking about what I call value acceleration and exit planning for business owners. Um, because the object of today's exercise is to make sure that everyone is aware that exit planning is not something that you do, that you wait to do when you're ready to exit, as Dennis has already explained, but something that you should be doing in your business every day leading up to that event for as long as possible. If you walk away with one thing from today, it's the earlier you start exit planning, the more value your business will be worth at the time that you exit. So here's a couple of things that I want to share to maybe help open up everyone's eyes to the importance of doing this. Everyone likes to talk about the deal that closed. You know, we've sold a business, or we know someone that sold a business, or one of our professional colleagues sold a business, and we all talk about the successes. But the fact is that most businesses that go to market don't actually sell. There's a 70% failure rate. And those that do sell, the 30% that do sell, 75% of those sellers, those business owners, when they're surveyed a year after the sale, they express profound regret as to how they feel about how the sale went. You know, it could be that they had unrealistic value expectations. It could be that maybe they had realistic value expectations, but now that they sold their business and they're living in a post-sale world, maybe the sales proceeds weren't sufficient to fund the retirement that they wish they had. You know, for every business owner, there's a different reason why they had regret, but very few of them are satisfied with looking back at how it went. And of all those reasons, I boil it really down to two things. You know, had I only known, had I gone into this transaction more prepared, had I only started earlier, or had I only been advised. And I think there's an onus that falls on us, the community of professional advisors, to help our clients think about getting an early start so that they can have a greater value and a more successful exit from their business. So this is the normal situation. You know, if you look at the horizontal line as time and the vertical line as value, you start out in that stage where you're just starting your company for the first time and you really don't know if this is going to work or not, but you're putting every ounce of energy and sweat and your personal finances in to make it happen. And then you reach a point where, okay, this thing has, we're going to make it. We've got a viable company here, but we don't know how long, we don't know how big, but we know it's going to work. And then typically the owners are focusing on a couple of things. They're focused, time goes by, they're focusing on running the day-to-day operations of the business, perhaps increasing sales, but they're also concerned about a growing lifestyle, and maybe they're stripping earnings out of the company as fast as they can to help support their lifestyle. Or perhaps they're focusing on minimizing taxes, and maybe there's a lot of expenses that are being run through the business to decrease earnings, to decrease taxes, which also can sometimes deflate value. But the point is that most business owners go through time and they don't think about the value of the company until they get to the point when they're actually ready to sell. And then they're often surprised that the company is not worth as much as they think it would be, or they would like it to be, or they need it to be to fund their retirement. And they would like to call exit planning advisors to come in at the point of sale and miraculously raise the value from what it is, to what they'd like it to be, or what they need it to be. And so the point here is that getting an early start on focusing on value will help drive value to the highest price at the point when you are ready to exit. But not only that, most companies never make it to that stage, the idea of when they want to exit. So maybe you're 40 years old and you plan to retire and exit your business when you're 60. 55% of the business owners exit their business long before they reach that. And those are for bad things, like there's a death, there's a disability, there's a downturn in the economy, there's financial distress in the company. Whatever it is, 55% of businesses sell somewhere in here because of those things. But on the positive side, and we don't have any data on this, is, you know, what happens when you get an unsolicited offer 5 or 10 years early that you planned on selling? Are you going to sell it for the current value or the maximum value? You're probably going to sell it for the maximum value if you've been working toward the maximum value every day. And if not, If you've been waiting to postpone till you're ready to exit, you're probably going to sell for a discounted price if you sell at that point in time. So this is extending that same curve, but it's looking at the post-sale years. And I like to say post-sale. I don't like to say retirement. And here's why. If you plan on exiting your business when you're 60, you might have owned that business for, say, 25 years, and now you're 60 and you're exiting. You may live for another 35 years. You may live a good, healthy lifestyle for another 35 or even 40 years. Your post-sale years may outnumber your years as a business owner by a lot. So the two things that we're looking at is what is your business worth versus what it could have been worth? And that's what we call the value gap. And you want to spend your time in your early years identifying the value gap and closing the value gap. So no matter when you exit, as planned or earlier than expected, you're always exiting at the maximum value of your company because you're focusing on the value. The other thing that we want to look at is when you sell your business for a certain price, what percentage of your total assets, your personal net worth is that? Is your business 20% of your total net worth, or is it 80% of your total net worth? If it's closer to 75 or 80%, it really behooves you to start working earlier on maximizing that value. Because once you exit your company and now you're no longer earning, having earnings, but you're actually spending down your wealth, you want to look at what we call the wealth gap. How long will my assets last in my retirement if I sell at a certain price versus how much do I need it to sell to sustain the lifestyle that I chose? So you need to decide what kind of lifestyle you want to have in the post-sale life, what that will cost. Do you want to make sure that your homes are debt-free? Do you want to buy a second home for a vacation home? Do you want to buy a third home to be near your grandchildren who live on the other side of the country? Do you want to fund your grandchildren's education? Do you want to help your kids buy their first home? Do you want to leave any money to your alumni association? Does the value of your company allow you to do those things, or will you have a wealth gap and potentially either not accomplish those goals or potentially outlive your assets? So those are the gaps that we want to close, the value gap and the wealth gap. So we think it takes three things to have a successful exit plan. One is the motivation to do it. And we don't think that business owners are lacking motivation. It takes a lot to start a business, build a business, grow a business, and get out of bed and run it every day. So business owners are not lacking motivation, but they're often lacking the motivation to focus on exit planning. They're stuck with their head down in the day-to-day operations, and they're not looking at the value gap or the potential value gap or what closing that gap could mean. Once you have the motivation to say, I need to start focusing on this now, there are very few advisors out there who are saying, I can provide you with a plan, because most business owners, if they decide to engage in exit planning now, they don't know what to do. They don't have a playbook. So we think business owners need a plan. And once you have a plan, that's just a document that sits unopened on your computer or collecting dust on your desk, unless you actually have a process to implement for the plan. So we need motivation, we need the plan, and we need a process to follow. We need a step-by-step guide to actually tell us what to do, how to do it, when to do it. So we hope that identifying the value gap in the company, what the business is worth and what it could be worth, would be sufficient motivation. Identifying the wealth gap, how long will your assets last based on your current value versus how much they could last if the business reaches its potential value, that this would be a motivating factor to get business owners to focus on running the day-to-day operations, to really focusing on the value of the business and how to maximize that value at the earliest possible time. So once you've got the motivation to do it, what's your plan? We like to think of a plan in 5 steps. The first step is identify value. We believe it's good for businesses to get a business valuation done every few years. And if you're in a volatile industry, a volatile business, maybe even more frequently. But identifying the value is not the end of the process for for this. It's one thing to say that your business is worth $20 million or $10 million or $5 million. But let's look at the $5 million business. Telling you your business is worth $5 million is useful information. But what's more powerful information is to say that businesses in your industry, in your size, sell for a range of values between 3 million and 8 million. Now, if you're at 5 million, that means there's value growth opportunities in your company. So you really want to know what the range of potential value is and where do you sit on that range. Once you identify the value range, the next thing you want to do is protect the assets that you have. And it's not just protect them for your own benefit, but it's also de-risking the company, because there may be risks in that company that does not keep the business owner awake at night, but a buyer may be concerned about those risks. And buyers are not afraid of risk, but they sniff out risk like bloodhounds. And the more risks they find in your business, the less they're willing to pay for it. So de-risking the business improves the value of the company in the eyes of a buyer. After you de-risk the company, you want to identify what the value drivers are. Where are the opportunities to increase the value in the assets that you own and new opportunities? And then the fourth step is harvesting or monetizing or exiting your business, turning it into cash, and making sure that you have sufficient net worth to lead the post-sale life or the retirement life that you want to. And manage is at the end, but this is not necessarily a sequential order. You certainly want to manage your business and your personal wealth at all times. But once you exit your business, it's a change of mindset. Business owners feel like they have control over the business, and to some extent they do, because they can make decisions that affect the value of the business. Once that business is monetized and turned into cash, they'll often not have control over what affects the value of their portfolio. It's subject to market conditions, and they'll probably have personal advisors who are making the decisions about their wealth, whereas they made the decisions every day about their business. So those are the 5 steps that we call the value acceleration plan. Identify the range of values, de-risk the business, look for the value drivers, harvest and monetize your business, and manage your wealth to make sure that you fulfill all your post-sale goals. So that's the 5-step plan. But a plan needs a process. You need a step-by-step guide as to what to do, when to do it, and how to implement the plan. So that's what we call the value acceleration process. And there's 3 stages. There's discovery, there's acceleration, and then there's harvest. So discovery is really the heart of what you do to determine where your risks are, where your value drivers are, what your value gaps are, what your wealth gaps are, and what steps you need to take to improve those. So the first thing that we do is we look at what your business compares to businesses in the industry, benchmarking to see if your business is performing higher or lower. We also look deeply into what are the risks in your business and where are the value opportunities. And on the personal side, how much wealth do you need to accumulate to fulfill your personal goals? Where is your personal risk? Where are the holes in your personal financial plan? And what are you going to do with your life after you exit your business? There's many business owners who get to the point where they're ready to sell their business and they back out because they don't know what they're going to do next. And once you dig deep into the discovery process, you now have a prioritized plan on all the action steps that you need to take to increase the value and be prepared to exit. So we'll get into the discovery section in a little bit more detail, because that's really the heart of exit planning. Once you have your prioritized action plan, the next step is not quick, but it can be easy, because it takes that plan and one step at a time, it implements all the changes in your business to de-risk the business, improve business value, and make sure that you're personally, financially, and emotionally prepared to exit before you exit. And while you're doing this, while you're making the changes to your company and changes in your personal financial life, you're accumulating documents, because the documents are proof that you are either financially prepared to retire and exit. It's also proof to demonstrate the value of your company. Buyers will come in and they'll ask you for certain documents. So, in what they call the due diligence process, when they come in and look to see if they really want to buy your business, and how much they want to pay for your business. And so you're accumulating the documents. So at any point in time, you're always ready to sell because you're ready for that due diligence process. But not only that, but when you're adding value for your company, you've assembled the documentation to demonstrate and prove the value to a potential buyer. And you also know what you're going to do when you're ready to exit, because you've implemented a strategy for what you're going to do when you exit, and you've practiced that plan. And then you either exit and sell your company, or in some cases, you don't. Sometimes you may be in a situation where you realize that there's more potential value than you have today. We've worked with clients who decided that they want to buy out their partners at this point in time and then go back and regrow the value. Whereas they thought they would exit, they're ready to take it to the next level. So what I want to do now is really to get into discovery process a little bit more, because that's really the heart of exit planning. So just to give you an idea of the steps that we take and the steps that you can take that really go into how to value your business and change the value. The first thing that you can do is look at your financial statements for the past 3 years and try to look at them through the eyes of a buyer, not your own eyes. Look for what we call add backs and take backs or takeaways. And look at your financial statements. Use that information to look at your financial statements, not as they sit on your books, not as they're printed out by your bookkeeper, your accountant, but what does a buyer see? For example, are there assets on your balance sheet that have nothing to do with your business that a buyer has no interest in buying? Are there liabilities on your books that have nothing to, that would have no interest to the buyer, that they would not accept? Are there items of expenses on your profit and loss statement that are more personal expenses, that are dragging down your earnings and making your company look less profitable than they really would? What would your profit and loss statement look like if you took those expenses out? Discretionary expenses, expenses that you incur because it's your personal choice that a buyer would never incur. By taking out those discretionary expenses, you show a higher profit, but you're not just showing a higher profit, you're showing the real profit, the true profit. And often there aren't discretionary items, but there's one-time expenditures. So, maybe 3 years ago, you decided to reinvest in further developing your software, and there were very high software expenses, in a certain year. That's a non-recurring expense. So while it was a real bona fide business expense, it's not an ongoing annual expense. You can add that back and show the true ongoing earnings of the company for that year. And that's what we call recasting your financial statements. And when you do that, you will often find that you're seeing a more profitable company, but you're also presenting a more true and more real picture of what the company's true earnings are. After we do that, we collect industry data. You may get these numbers from your trade associations or other sources, but we collect industry data and we compare not your original financials that you look at every day, but your recasted financials, compare it to how the industry is performing, and we see whether you're performing higher or lower, or your earnings as a percentage of sales higher or lower than the industry average, other benchmarking data. And then we also look to the industry to find out what companies are selling for in your industry in recent transactions. Sometimes that's a year back, sometimes it's 2 years back, depending on the volume. And what exit experts or exit professionals like to say is, I know what your company sells for. Companies in your industry sell for 5 times earnings. And there's a little bit of truth to that. That might be the average of what companies sell for. But when we look at actual transactions, we find they sell for anywhere between 3 times earnings and 8 times earnings. So the average might be 5. We want to find out if your company is trading higher or lower. To do that, we take a deep dive into the risk values and the value factors, and I'll give you examples of some of those. And we look at your company and we help you score your company on how high or low you score on individual specific value factors and risk factors. And then we use that to determine whether you would be trading high or low based on the range of multiples or the range of values that your industry is currently selling for. And then we use that to prepare a map so that you know exactly what needs to be done, what steps need to be taken to increase value decrease risk, and prepare for the exit at the maximum possible price. And so when we're doing that, these are the factors that we look at. We look at things like your forecast factors. A buyer will always ask you for your 5-year forecast. How many business owners have a 5-year forecast? The larger the company, the more likely they're going to have a 5-year forecast. The smaller the company, less likely they're going to have a 5-year. They may have a 2-year, they may have a 1-year, or they may have none. But the point is that you don't want to be putting together a 5-year forecast for the very first time when you want to take your company market, because it won't have any credibility. You want to be able to demonstrate to a buyer that using financial forecasts is part of your day-to-day management of your company. And as you do your forecast and match it to actual over time, you'll see that your forecast becomes more realistic each different time you do it. So that if you do this for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years before you go to market, your forecast will be far more accurate and far more reliable and have greater credibility, in the eyes of a buyer. We look at things like intellectual property. We were very much surprised when one of our clients who's in the food production industry did not have trade names or trademarks, copyrighted. We also found out that they invented a way of creating their product, for manufacturing the product that should have been patent protected and wasn't. We find that clients don't know if their leases are transferable, important leases. If your business location is an integral part of your business, is that lease transferable? Is it an attractive lease? Is your office located in a high rent area that would be very attractive because the location of your business is important? Or are you overpaying your rent because your customers really don't care where your business is, and you shouldn't be in, a marquee building in the financial district? You should be in a less expensive location. So we look at over 125 factors of what it takes to run a business successfully, and the type of things that any buyer may ask you. Here's another thing: management issues. So a lot of times people will say, my management team is terrific because we have Lori, and Lori is the best salesperson. So if you want to look at management issues one at a time, let's look at sales. Lori is the best salesperson in the business. She can get her foot in the door better than anyone. And once she has her foot in the door, that sale is good as landed. And when you buy my business, you'll want to pay a premium because Lori's terrific and Lori comes with the business. And that might be true, and that has some value. But a different way of answering that question might be, we have a really effective sales process and sales system. And anybody who comes to work for us, no matter what their selling experience is, and no matter what company they come from, they get trained on our sales model and our sales process. And we have the manual and we have the training system. And because we have such a reputation for an outstanding sales process, we can attract top salespeople like Lori. But not only that, but we can develop other Loris because we have a process for doing so. So that's the difference between a company that has some value because they have some good people, and a higher value company that has processes for developing their people, and the different aspects of their operations are in a process that can be replicated by a buyer. So any process that you have that can be replicated by is a process that adds value and that can be sold. The more knowledge that is in the business owner's head and not part of a process devalues the business. The financial statements we already talked about. The financial statements done in your books don't tell the whole story or the real story or the true value of the business. So you want to be able to present restated financials. So we're not going to go over all of these in detail, but you'll see that these are not, my background is as a CPA, but most of these are not tax issues. Most of these are not accounting issues. These are different factors and the different aspects for running your business. But at the end of the day, not only do you want to address all these factors to make sure that you're reducing risk and maximizing value, but you also want to accumulate the documents to demonstrate the value of your business and be ready for a due diligence process, when the time comes. So we take the scoring on all those and we look at what companies are selling for your industry. And if the range is from 3 or 4 all the way up to 6 or 7, we want to see where you are. And if you're rating yourself low in all those categories, because there are great opportunities for improvement, and so maybe you're only going to sell for 4 times earnings, and maybe your earnings are $1 million, well, that would be a $4 million sales price. But if we can improve your company just a little bit, so you get it to the average, not great, but just average, you can go from 4 times earnings to 5 times earnings, or a $4 million price to a $5 million price. You can put $1 million more in your pocket just by becoming an average company. But if you become a best-in-class company and you're selling at the high end of the range, if you're selling for 6 times earnings and 7 times earnings, because that's what best-in-class businesses sell for in your industry, that's value acceleration. And this is exactly why we call it value acceleration, because business owners tend to, left to their own devices, wait until they're ready to sell to suddenly skyrocket up to that value, peak value, but it doesn't happen over a short period of time. If you have to make changes to your portfolio of products, if you have to make changes to your portfolio of customers, if you have to generate contractual obligations instead of handshake relationships, with customers or clients, all those things take time. And the earlier you start, the greater opportunity you have to maximize or generate greater value. So what we think we deliver, and you can deliver to yourself by following similar steps at the end of stage 1 that we call discovery, is you want to be able to provide financial statements that reflect the true value of your company in the buyer's eyes, not the ones that sit on your books every day. What does your real balance sheet look like when it's cleaned up? What does your true profit and loss statement look like when you take out discretionary items or non-recurring items? What is the real earnings of your company for the past several years? What does your forecast look like? And how do you compare to other businesses in your industry? Is your performance stronger or weaker? Then we like to look at the value range. What do companies in your business really sell for? Not the common multiple of earnings or not the average, but what are the real ranges, the highs and the lows? And do an assessment of your company to see where you would sit on that value range. Identify what steps can be taken to de-risk the company. Because again, when buyers see risk, they're not afraid of risk, but it affects how much they're willing to pay. So how do we de-risk the company? Where are the opportunities to increase value? How to make the company exit ready, and how to prepare the documentation. And that documentation is sort of a living, breathing data room, because every time your documentation changes over time, as years pass, you'll add new financial data to it. As you have new leases signed, you'll add the new leases to it. And not only that, we want to make sure that you know what you're going to do with your life. So when you sell your business on Friday afternoon, you're not waking up Monday morning for the next 30 years saying, what am I going to do now? What's going to engage me? Or do I have enough, now that my business is sold and I don't have that inflow of income anymore, do I have enough wealth to sustain my lifestyle and fulfill my exit goals? So again, the whole point is to find out what is the range of potential values, where does your business currently sit on that range, and what is the value gap, and how do you accelerate up that gap? And also, what is the wealth gap? What do you need your company to be worth when you exit? So most advisors who talk about exit only focus on the business, but we focus on the business owner. So all we've done so far is talk about how to implement an exit strategy, an exit plan, a value acceleration plan for the business itself. But that's incomplete unless you take the next step. So we go through the same assessment with the business owner. Where are you with your wealth and financial management plan? Do you have a diversified portfolio? Is all your wealth sitting inside your business? If 80% of your value of your personal assets, your current estate, if 80% or 70% of the value is sitting in your business, that's like having all your investments sitting in one stock in one company. You know, if you took all your wealth and gave it to your financial advisor or your money manager and said, go out and buy a portfolio of stock, so I have a nice diversified portfolio, and they said, no, 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 we want to invest all your money in one stock because we think this is a really great stock, you'd probably fire that financial professional and say, no, I need to diversify my portfolio because I need to manage risk. But when your net worth is tied up in one business, it's like all your net worth is tied up in one stock. You don't have a diversified portfolio. Do you really know how much wealth you need to have the lifestyle so that you don't outlive your assets? You can handle financial emergencies. You know, what happens if 15 years after you sell your business, you need to go into a long-term care facility? You know, that comes under risk management. Do you have long-term care insurance? Or have you accumulated enough wealth to cover that emergency without long-term care insurance? So you want to make sure before you exit your business that you're financially prepared for life for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years after that point. But most importantly, and the area that almost every exit planner or exit professional completely ignores, is what am I going to do with my life for the next 30 years after I exit my business? You should have a plan while you're still a business owner, and you should practice that plan to see if it's realistic. You know, I don't get around to golfing as much as I like. I want to do more golfing when I exit my business. That's really not a plan, because, you know, golfing 30 days in a row will become quite tiresome. You're not going to be golfing every day for the next 30 years. Maybe something that you do with increased frequency because you're passionate about it, but it's not going to replace the creative energies that you exercise through your business. It's not going to replace the passion that you've put into starting, growing, and building this business. Sometimes your intellectual stimulation is all wrapped up in your business, and also your social life. You know, if you look at who your friends and contacts, who you have dinner with, who you socialize with, if that's all wrapped up in your business, many business owners are surprised when that whole social network goes away, when they're no longer affiliated with their business, and what's going to replace that. So this is what we call the value acceleration plan, just a discovery. How do you accelerate the value of your business? How do you prepare financially, personally, and emotionally, and put that into a plan? That's the heart of real exit planning, long-term exit planning, what you do when you're not ready to sell your company. And then the next step is to take that plan and implement the changes in your personal financial life and within your business, and accumulate the documentation that you've done so. Acceleration is much easier than discovery, but discovery is done in a short period of time. Acceleration can take several weeks, more likely several months, or even sometimes several years. But when you do it right, when you're ready to exit, when an unsolicited offer comes in and surprises you, if you have any sort of event in your business or personal life that forces you to exit, or you're exiting at the exit that you planned on, going through this process will leave you with less trepidation about your exit, because you've planned it and you've executed on it and you've implemented the strategy to exit your business at the right time, you know, at the right value. So that's the main goal of what we're trying to accomplish here, and what we do in our exit planning practice. And I hope that left you with ideas as to what you can do in your own business to plan accordingly, de-risk, look for value drivers. Don't forget to look at the financial side, and what are your personal financial position look like today? What does your business need to be worth to fulfill your post-sale goals? And what are you going to do with your life after you exit your business? So with the remaining time, we can do one of two things. We can go into conversation, discussion, question, answer, or we can go into a little bit of a case study. But Dennis did mention that we have an ebook available. And so there's the go-to for that, www.bpmcpa.com/value growth. And maybe I'll see if I can put that in the chat box so you can copy and paste it. So anybody who wants to can access that book. And that covers a lot of the concepts that we covered today, but it talks about different client situations, and maybe goes into some things in a little bit more detail. But that's certainly accessible to anybody who'd like to access it. So
Rich?
Dennis, at this point, would you like to engage in conversation?
Well, first of all, Rich, if you, we've got sufficient time to, if you could do, say, 5 minutes of just a case study that gives an example of something that you were able to actually work on and change. But I do have one question that came up, an excellent one I'll throw in right now, which is how does BPM gather this data from private businesses in order to develop this range of values? So that's an interesting question. How do you get that?
It is an interesting question. And so we have a team that does nothing but business valuations, and they have access to all sorts of databases that we're able to tap into. So that's the plus side, that we do have a lot of databases with those information. But to be very frank, the smaller the company and the private company, that information is much harder to access because it's not publicly. With larger public companies, it's mandatory that it's accessible to public. So there's databases full of it. When you get into private companies, it's really disclosed on a voluntary basis or a no-name basis, and so there's not as much plentiful data. So sometimes we have to look at the larger companies, which are many in volume, and the smaller sample of private companies, which are just fewer and far between, and extrapolate by looking at the data that we have. But it is true that larger companies do sell for higher multiples. But there's a lesson in that. It's not just that size matters, it does. A larger company will always sell for a greater multiple than a smaller company. But because larger companies have so much compliance, required government compliance, that they're forced to put processes and systems in place that unpublic companies, smaller private companies, are not forced to put in place. So business owners often take shortcuts. I'm not required to put that process in place, so I'm not going to take the time and money to do that now. So larger companies tend to be more businesses that are driven by processes and systems, whereas smaller companies have less value because they tend to be run not by processes and systems, but they're run by owners and knowledge that is in an owner's head that has often not been put into a process in a system. So when the owner exits the business, that knowledge walks out the door and leaves a vacuum behind.
Okay, can you give us a quick sketch of a
Yeah, so I do have a case study here, which I'll go through quickly. It's based on many factors that we've seen in actual cases compiled into one. So what you're seeing here is not one single real business, but many real business issues that we've encountered. So we're talking about Ronnie, who owns a manufacturing company that owns a medical product that's sold over the counter in boutique stores, on the West Coast. They have strong sales. They've got 10 million in sales, which means they've got a very strong base, but their sales are not growing, which means they have a good loyal base of customers, but they're not adding new customers. And so Ronnie is 60 years old and she would like to retire now. Her earnings are about $1 million a year. And she's told by professionals in conversation that her industry sells for 5 times earnings. So she says, okay, my earnings are $1 million. My industry sells for 5 times earnings. My company is worth $5 million, right? Well, what I hope everybody learned today, that that's just the average price, and Ronnie's business might sell for 5 or 6 or 7 million, or it might sell for 4 or 3 or 2 million, depending on the quality of the business, how ready it is for sale. And when a buyer comes in and takes a deep dive, what they're going to find out. And will they offer a premium because it's a best-in-class business, or will they offer a discounted price because they find a lot of holes and risk factors? So Ronnie's plan is $5 million. My company must be worth $5 million. May not be a correct assumption, but she says that's not enough. I really need to double the value of my company immediately before I sell. So she has the strategy that she's going to find a national chain like CVS and get her product into that national chain, which will double her sales overnight. They're not going to have 10 million sales. They're going to be 20 million. And so her assumption is that if I've doubled my sales, my company must now be double. If it was worth 5 million before, now it's worth 10 million. So now I can sell my company for twice the price. So is that a correct assumption by Ronnie? Probably not. And here's why. So we're going to look at all the things that Ronnie did wrong by waiting until she was ready to sell to implement changes, and how she could have had a different outcome, how she started 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or even 10 years earlier. The point here is that there's no such thing as too early to start. So Ronnie identified the big customer, got her foot in the door, landed the contract, negotiated the contract, realized she needed a larger facility, so she relocated the company, negotiated the lease, negotiated for the purchase of the equipment, went to the bank and got a financing package to get the new equipment and the larger space, went through the process of hiring the additional workforce needed to serve a company that was now twice as large with one gigantic customer that needed full attention. And at the end of the process, I mean, if one person does all this, they're probably going to be quite exhausted and ready to exit the company, right? So Ronnie thinks now that her business is worth twice the size, twice the value, and she's ready to sell. But where Ronnie sees strength in her business, buyers may see weakness, buyers may see risk and look for value discounts. So let's look what we find. So in the buyer's eyes, buyers are not going to be impressed that Ronnie doubled sales overnight, because buyers don't want to see sudden growth, because what can suddenly go up can suddenly go down, right? They want to see sustained growth. So getting a contract like this 3, 5, 7 years ago would be worth a lot more in a buyer's eyes than just suddenly getting it now immediately before sale. They're going to discount the value of that new customer because there's no sustained proof that those sales will continue. So there's a risk. So here's a question. Ronnie doubled sales overnight, so she thinks her company is worth double value. But have earnings doubled? Buyers like to look at earnings because they want to see the cash flow they're going to get from the company, right? So when Ronnie's going from selling to boutique companies to desperately getting her business into a national chain, do you think that national chain is going to pay the same price for her products as the little boutique companies? Probably not. The national chains are notorious for negotiating a far lower price. So Ronnie's probably going to sell to CVS at a lower profit margin. So she's going to market with increasing sales, but shrinking product margins and shrinking earnings as a percentage of sales. Buyers don't want to see shrinking earnings. They want to see earnings sustained or growth. So there's another discount factor. Another thing is, if Ronnie's selling her business to a much larger player in the industry, they may already have a contract with CVS, and they may have much more favorable terms, and they may have wished Ronnie didn't sign a contract with CVS at less favorable terms immediately before going to market, because they have much better terms with CVS. It would be more valuable if they negotiated a contract with CVS after they purchased the business, because they're already doing business with CVS, on better terms. And a big risk here, and this is very common in smaller private companies, when you have one customer that's 50% of your sales, that is a huge risk in buyers' eyes. They don't want to see any one customer who's more than 20%, and even that's high, 20% of your total sales. Because what happens if you lose this contract, you lose this customer, your business gets cut in half overnight, right? So by implementing a plan 5, 6, 7 years ago, they wouldn't have to rely on the one big customer. Maybe they would have looked at regional chains instead of a national chains and slowly built up so they could maintain profit margins, maintain a more reasonable customer concentration without having to land the big chain, national chain, or waiting until they got to the point where it's a nice addition as opposed to a humongous addition that really changes the whole shape of the company. So having 50% value in your company is just unacceptable risk from a buyer. There's a big discount there, much to Ronnie's surprise. And then, Ronnie also has to wonder if feeding the monster now, do they really have capacity to serve this new giant customer and serve all their smaller customers at the same time? If they fail to develop the capacity to do both, they may find that some of their smaller customers are dropping off as their service is more poor. because everyone's focused on the new large company, the new business that they're afraid of losing, right? The new big gigantic customer. But if those small customers are dropping off, each individual one doesn't affect total sales very much, but those are your high margin customers. So you're sacrificing 50% of your high margin customers to save the 50% small margin customer. And then let's look at Ronnie's management team. This is a very common problem for smaller companies. Ronnie did the marketing, got her foot in the door with the giant customer CVS, handled all the negotiations, the relocation of the company to a larger facility, the equipment purchasing, the equipment financing, and the hiring. There's much too much owner dependence in this company. There's no bench strength. There's no management team. You know, the buyer wants to know, who's your management team? How strong are they? And not only how strong are they, but what have you done to assure me that that management team will come with me and stay with me after I buy your company? So, you know, there's ways of putting in plans to provide incentives for your key employees to stay with the company after a sale, but it also takes time to develop your management team to replace you, not only for a sales scenario, but for disaster planning and contingency planning. You know, if you're not ready to, you know, if you're 40 years old and you don't want to sell until you're 60, what happens if you have a death or a disability or some catastrophe that you're no longer able to run the company at all or for a temporary period of time? Who understands the vision of your company? Who can ensure that your vision for the company continues? All the things that you do as the owner on a day-to-day operation, who is going to do all those things? Who's going to suddenly, with no warning, step in and handle all your responsibilities? And do they know that? And does anything have to change as you change their responsibility?
All right, Rich, you're back. You're muted.
Thank you. That happened. So sorry about that. So did I?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So
did I finish with this slide?
I think you were just finishing with that, but your presentation has generated a couple of questions I'd like to get in.
Sure, absolutely.
And both of them have to do sort of with especially with smaller business. One is, you know, how do owners? What's the best practice to separate out these personal expenses that all small businesses owners especially will run through, which reduces taxes or separates out for family distributions? How do they best reduce those that help but still reflect the profitability from a buyer's perspective? And the second question I'd like you to take a shot at is for if you're in a business with significant industry risks and changing compliance issues, how do you make a realistic 5-year projections? And how do you estimate the value as a multiple of earnings when the company is still in growth phase? Those somewhat related questions for smaller business.
Right. So I'll take the first question first, then you may have to remind me what the second question is when we get to it. But we actually have an article. We write a monthly series called the Business Owners Special Series of the Boss Series. And our one that we published in April asked the question, is your tax strategy killing your business value? And it's a great question to ask. So there's two ways of answering this question. One is that sometimes, you know, a business owner has to decide which game do they want to play. Do they really want to minimize taxes, or do they want to maximize value? Sometimes you have to choose one over the other. Not always. There are strategies that minimize taxes and don't depress value. You know, the certain areas of the code, you know, that give you deductions that are for tax purposes only, but not for your books, so that they're not depressing the earnings of the company. But, you know, if you're putting family members on the payroll, if you're running personal expenses to the company, you know, you have to decide whether you really want to use that to depress earnings and pay less taxes, or do you want to not do that and show your potential buyer, and not only potential buyer, but your banker. If you talk to any banker, the one thing that drives them nuts is they want to make loans to a business that they think has strong earnings, but the earnings are artificially deflated because of all the personal expenditures and discretionary expenditures that are running through the business. So there's a trade-off there. But even if you've run all these personal expenses through your company, what we like to do is schedule out a 5-year financial statement, a 5-year profit and loss statement, and show line by line, item by item, each of the discretionary items that are included in the expenses that a buyer would not incur. And that's part of the package that we put together that we have ready at all times. And each year we update this to show all the discretionary expenses to go from the value.
Oh, no.
Dennis, this is,
Hi, Lan.
hi. So if I can just fill in the gap here, if that's okay with you. So I'm a financial planner, and I have gone through this value acceleration, as a certified asset planning advisor. So what Rich has presented, it is so real in the business world. So what he has presented, the methodology and the value added through this process, it really is tremendous. The key thing is start earlier, think ahead. And it's parallel doing that personal financial planning and the business planning, the asset planning, start way earlier than the time you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not doing too well, my health is not holding up, and I'm so tired, and I want to exit now. So just I really appreciate this process, and I really has created a tremendous result going through this. So just wanted to add my comment.
Yeah, thank you, Lan. It's a very, I know that you also went through the training, the same as Rich did, and I can chime in as the lawyer who's usually brought in at the time of the sale to structure the sale and looking at financials and the valuation method. Owners oftentimes over the last year. I wanted to get into the net working capital. I don't think we're going to have a chance to do that. Rich, you back?
Yeah, thank you, Comcast. We love Comcast.
All right. Well, we did. You'd finished up answering most of the questions about personal expenses, and then we had the one other pending question, which was, if your business is high, it's in a substantial risk type of industry. There's a lot of compliance issues. You're trying to grow. You're in a growth mode. How are you going to get that 5-year plan? How are you going to value that business or project its earnings over the next 5 years?
Well, we recommend that business owners have a valuation like every 2 to 3 years. But if you're in a highly volatile industry or highly volatile business, you might even want to think about getting a business valuation, annually. It's expensive, but the volatility suggests that it might be necessary. If you're in a highly regulated business, your buyer is going to look at your compliance as a risk issue. So you certainly have to focus on that. And how do you project out your 5 years? It's less easy to do. But you still need to do it, but it's an exercise that's worth going through because it can help you identify how much capital you may need, how much cash you may need to deal with unexpected fluctuations in sudden compliance changes or sudden changes you have to make to your product or to your industry. And even in a highly volatile business, doing this over time, you'll become more accurate over time. So there's no quick, easy answer to say this is what you do to fix that problem. But you should continue to do your forecast, and compliance issues are huge issues, and you have to stay on top of them. They're the ones that you definitely do not want to wait until you're ready to sell to go back and say, are we compliant with all the regulations in our industry?
Okay, I have a question, one final one to address this issue. With small business sales, typically the purchase and sale agreement will have a sales price, but that sales price is subject to adjustment after the closing for net working capital. And net working capital takes into a lot of these things you've been talking about, personal expenses, loans on the books. So as part of your process for helping companies come up with a plan, you discuss the issue of net working capital at all and how their books might be structured to help with that post-sale adjustment?
Yeah, so you're talking about how much capital the buyer requires to be in the business at the point of sale.
Right.
You know, we do. That's more of getting close to a transaction conversation. But what I find happens with business owners is they are sometimes they go one way or the other. You know, sometimes they're extremely nervous and conservative and leave too much cash in the business, which the buyer perceives now as the normal required working capital because it sits there every year. But you certainly want to be able to demonstrate from your 5-year financial, you know, when you look at your earnings of the company, you know, you can see how much capital is actually required in the company, you know, to sustain it, you know, each year. But there's also the other extreme. Sometimes buyers come in and they say, you know, we want to do a cash-free, debt-free deal. You know, you can take all the cash out of the company, but you also got to make sure we're getting a debt-free company as well. So sometimes it goes the other extreme, and sellers have to be prepared for. They may be taking some of that sales price and using it to eliminate the company debts. I mean, we had a client who was adamant that he wanted to sell his business for $30 million, and no one was offering him anywhere near $30 million. He finally had a buyer who said, we'll give you $30 million. And it was great. He got a check for $30 million. But the contingency was that the debt had to be removed from the books. The debt was $13 million. So the first 13 million of those proceeds took out the $13 million debt. So the client really didn't sell their business for 30 million. They really sold it for 17 million. But they had a photocopy of that $30 million check. To bring to the cocktail parties and tell their friends. So you need to either be able to demonstrate through your financial forecast and hindsight with your financials what is the real capital requirements of the company, or be prepared that you don't have to leave any capital in there, but you might be required to eliminate the debt prior to sale. So you should be prepared for both situations.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rich, for the presentation. Thank you, Jeffrey, for helping us through this structure. And we hope to see you all at our next program. You can check our website, but we want to let you go back to your work. Lan, did you have a final question or point you wanted to make?
No, I just pasted the ebook by Rich. How to download the ebook. Paste the link.
Oh, thank you very much, Lan. You know, I meant to do that and I got distracted by my Comcast problem. So thank you, Lan. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you to the Swiss American Chamber. Thanks to everyone who attended. I appreciated you having me today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.